Hi, everybody. My name is Joe Borgstrom. I'm a principal with the firm Place and Main Advisors, and we're based in East Lansing, Michigan. And we were contracted by the Corpus Christi Regional Economic Development Corporation to conduct a phase 2 from a study that you heard about last year called Our Coastal Bend, where it looked at the attachment that people feel towards the region. This phase was designed to look at those shortcomings of the first phase of that study and look to see how we could build upon that to make the Coastal Bend region more attractive to people to want to stay and place roots and create long-term connection to the community. So just a brief summary of phase 1. What we found in phase 1 when we did the large analysis was that there was really a big strength and a couple of big weaknesses that we wanted to make sure to address. The largest strength that we had was that the Corpus Christi area and the Coastal Bend region was very family friendly, and it was great for senior citizens, although it had a couple of weaknesses, particularly in the 18 to 34 demographic, that there weren't enough places for people to meet, there weren't enough social offerings, and again, the government services and educational offerings, people felt they fell a little short. So the purpose of phase 2, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, was to enhance and expand the things that we found in that first phase that would help folks create a better connection and help retain and attract residents to the region. So I'm going to go over briefly some of the key recommendations that we had from this study. When we looked at the plan, we really wanted to base it off of 3 main areas: aesthetics and community assets, social offerings, and economic offerings and place connectedness. Up first is aesthetics and community assets. First and foremost, we think it's really important to strengthen the downtown core of Corpus Christi. As the downtown for the region, it is really important that this creates a great experience for folks, because this is the primary way in which people are going to interact with the city itself. And one of the key recommendations that we had here was to add 2,000 housing units to the downtown and adjacent neighborhoods. Realize 2,000 units sounds like a lot, but when you look at the housing projections for the next 5 years, 2,000 units only represents about 2% of the total housing units in the region altogether. So this is really an attainable goal. Also, we want to look at activating beachfront and parks, and we want to give this brief example, recognizing that the beachfront itself, the parkland that goes all along the coast there, is a fantastic asset for the region, but it is not really programmed as well as it could be. And part of the challenge with programming is things like flooding and hurricanes and some of the weather issues that you have there. So we wanted to offer some suggestions on what we call semi-permanent activation of some of those spots. And this was a good example we wanted to show. Just idea around being able to use trailers to activate a space. This creates kind of a little bar or coffee shop right there on a beach or in a parking lot near the coastal areas. The next part of this is creating neighborhood nodes and development, and again, in improving aesthetics and community assets. One of the things that we found really interesting was how fast the region is growing from a housing standpoint, particularly when you look at the south side of the city of Corpus Christi, of creating these neighborhood nodes, which is kind of a planary term. I don't mean to get too geeky, but it's really about creating kind of neighborhoods, not just creating housing and strip malls. And we've seen a lot of that development over the last few years, but really creating something that feels more like a downtown or what we call a traditional commercial neighborhood. This is an example I wanted to show you. This is out of Huntsville, Alabama, and this was actually built over the last 10 years, and they're continuing on this development, but it's creating this neighborhood node in West Huntsville, where there's a huge housing boom going on, and a lot of the housing is kind of geared around this neighborhood. So it's not a whole series of grid homes that just kind of goes as far as you can see. That they're actually developing neighborhoods around these commercial neighborhood nodes. The other thing we want to make sure is we really point out the importance of public art. Now, I will tell you that downtown Corpus Christi and a lot of the surrounding areas have some tremendous public art, and I think it's a great asset. We want to build upon that and continue to encourage that public art, even in the new development that happens both in the city and in the surrounding areas. I want to give this example from Searcy, Arkansas, which is it was literally an abandoned alley, which they kind of did some creative. They allowed local artists to go through and create this really cool mural, and now it's really a destination for the area. People come here and they get their pictures taken, and it's really kind of a thing where people just kind of come and check out. And they do rotate kind of artwork, so they allow folks to come in, they have their piece displayed for a year or two, and then that gets painted over and gets redone. And just use of lights, those types of things to create kind of this cool space in downtown Searcy. Moving on to social offerings. one of the interesting things about the region is how many folks come into the Coastal Bend region and then stay for a little bit and then leave. So you have a very transient population. Part of that is military based, part of that is corporate based. But the idea around creating this community onboard servicing service that allows for people to come into the community, get introduced to the key institutions and places and things and people that they should know, and then allows them to kind of become part of the community a little bit faster. Same with concierge service. Again, people will move to the community, not know where they could or should be going for things, but to allow the ability for a new resident to call, say, the chamber or the CCRDC and be able to ask, all right, where do we go for this? And that helps create that framework to allow people to create connections quicker within the community. One of the big things that we heard, especially from the 18 to 34-year-olds, was the idea around helping them attain home ownership. We're seeing a very big divide when we see Gen X and boomers versus, say, millennials and Gen Zs and the ability for home ownership. So helping these millennials and these Gen Z generations to be able to attain home ownership quicker. We're seeing, again, that divergence between the ability to do that because of the housing market and wages that are being earned at those more entry levels. So helping these folks become established to own real estate to help establish those roots within the region. The other key part of this is trailing spouse. So allowing the ability for a trailing spouse who comes for, where the one spouse comes to the region for a job, and then to be able to connect that spouse, the other spouse, with the opportunities for employment elsewhere. And this was a really good example that we found in Vail Valley, which is in Vail, Colorado. For those trailing spouses, they have a core group of businesses within the region who've committed, saying, we will let spouses know when we have available jobs. And so they've created this database around this idea of available jobs for these trailing spouses. Now, it's not exclusively for these trailing spouses, but it is one of those ways that we can allow for those trailing spouses to know about these different employment opportunities. One of the other things we want to do around economic offerings and place connectedness is the idea of increasing education. So we looked at the Dallas County Promise as one of a couple of hundred promise programs around the country, but this idea of creating one specifically for students in the Coastal Bend to have them have the opportunity to pursue a 2 or 4 year degree after high school that allows for a better educated workforce and creates a more of a direct pipeline between the high schools in the region and TAMU CC and Del Mar College. Speaking of that, I also want to encourage the further expansion of both the higher education institutions, but TAMU CC, excuse me, this is Del Mar Colleges on the south side. The south side campus is a phenomenal idea that's moving forward. The idea of helping to expand that and to be able to build onto those key sectors in which they're looking to target the south side too, and then in partnership with that, also looking at TAMU CC's expansion into downtown, again, encouraging them as an anchor, getting more of those folks to interact and engage within the downtown core is incredibly important. So a couple of brief overviews. The 18 to 34 demographic, which folks identified as being a key statistic for the region. The idea around professional development efforts. So one of the things that we heard a lot from that demographic was that the workforce requirements were either entry level or 10 years experience. There wasn't a whole lot in between there. So again, allowing them to have professional development in that entry level to 10-year window. The idea around home ownership assistance programs, which we've already talked about, creating more walkable communities that goes to this neighborhood node idea. Folks want to be able to live somewhere, be able to walk and go to dinner and do shopping and be able to come back and not have to get into a car. We're seeing that across the country. This is not something that's kind of unique to the Coastal Bend, but we are seeing this especially for the millennial and Gen Z generations, more so than boomers or Gen Xers. Diversity of housing stock. So one of the things that's interesting is that you guys seem to have a divergence in your housing. You have multifamily and you have single family and not a whole lot in between. So the idea of being able to do more condos, being able to do more row housing, to do duplexes and triplexes and quadplexes, which allows for people to live in a building and still be able to rent units that are adjacent to them. So the idea of creating more diverse housing stock is important. And again, increasing social offerings, not necessarily the fact that you need more park space as an example. You have phenomenal park space. It's activating those park spaces. It's getting folks into, being able to have businesses where people can be social and interact. And then some of the general recommendations that we have for the overall area, again, the idea of the talent retention programs, 2,000 additional units again in the downtown, the public park and beach activation, increasing the mixed use neighborhoods that goes along with that, those neighborhood nodes, but creating these places where people can walk to shops, to restaurants, and be able to walk back home. Creating your zoning standards, which I know that the city of Corpus Christi in particular has been really good about putting together, along with the incentives, but in broadening those incentives to further encourage this type of development. Addressing blighted properties also came up, and we've provided some examples for how to address that in the place enhancement plan. And then even things like litter campaigns. I can't tell you the number of times when we talk to folks, people brought up just garbage laying around, and people brought up diapers in parking lots. So creating litter campaigns in which allows folks to both encourage the decrease of, or to not litter, and then also for cleanup programs. And we provide a couple of examples for that. Other things people really complain about, this was interesting, the roads. I got to tell you, we work in a lot of different places. People complain about the roads. In your case, it actually bore out in the in-place connectedness, how much the roads bother people. So doing things like pothole repair warranties as part of road construction projects. Also, moving on to public art programs, which we talked about earlier, increasing the number of festivals and events. When I talk about programming that space, that's what I mean, having more festivals and events and encouraging those. And then again, the social offerings, the community concierge and connectedness programs, having TAMU-CC as a downtown anchor, and Del Mar College tuition programs that Coastal Bend promise will all be really important to be able to help for people to create connections within the community and place roots so they'll be here long term.